You're listening to Blueprint and Soul, a podcast about building from the inside out. I'm your host, Sal Carter. Each week, we explore how intention, identity, and lived experience shape the way we build our lives, personally, professionally, and emotionally. There's a difference between being motivated and been driven by something you never chose. For a lot of us, proving starts as protection. It's how we learn to stay safe. It's how we learn to belong. It's how we learn to survive. But over time, that same instinct can quietly turn into pressure. Pressure to perform, pressure to stay useful, pressure to keep showing up in ways that earn approval, even when no one's asking anymore. This episode isn't about telling you to stop caring. It's not about ambition, laziness, or confidence. It's about noticing how proving can outlive its purpose and what it costs when it becomes part of your identity. If episode 6 was about what you're allowed to release, this episode is about what you're afraid might disappear when you stop proving. So let's slow down. Let's look at this gently. Before proving becomes something we question, it usually becomes something we rely on. It starts innocently, being capable, being dependable, being the one people can count on. Those traits are often praised. They're rewarded. They become part of how we're seen, and eventually, how we see ourselves. The problem isn't excellence. The problem isn't ambition. The problem is when those traits stop being choices and start becoming armor. When showing up strong feels safer than showing up uncertain. When being useful feels easier than being honest. When rest feels suspicious instead of restorative. That's usually the first quiet sign. Not burnout, not exhaustion, but the subtle sense that you're performing a version of yourself instead of inhabiting your own presence. You can feel it when being still makes you uncomfortable, when silence feels like failure, when being present doesn't feel sufficient unless you're producing something. This is how proving shifts from behavior to identity. Not because someone demands it, but because it becomes the way you've learned to stay safe, valued, and intact. There was a stretch in my life where being capable wasn't just something I did. It was how I knew I belonged. I noticed it in small moments, how quickly I would step in to help even when no one asked, how uncomfortable I felt sitting quietly without contributing something useful. Even in spaces where nothing was required of me, I'd feel this low-level tension, like I should be doing more, offering more, proving something. Not because anyone demanded it, but because being competent had become my default way of staying safe. What made it clear for me wasn't the behavior itself. It was the feeling underneath it. The subtle anxiety that showed up when I wasn't needed. the urge to justify my presence by being helpful, reliable, or strong. That's when I realized something important. Proving hadn't just shaped how I worked, it had quietly shaped how I saw myself. And once something becomes part of your identity, letting it go doesn't feel like rest. It feels like risk. Once proving becomes part of your identity, it doesn't just shape how you see yourself. It starts shaping how systems, relationships, and environments interact with you. Because proven is rarely neutral. It's often rewarded. It's often relied upon. And over time, it can quietly become expected. Not because anyone sat down and decided you should carry more, but because you've shown again and again that you can. This is where things get complicated. When you start proving, it can feel like disappearance, like you're breaking an unspoken agreement, like you're risking misunderstanding by softening. And the fear usually isn't, what if I fail? It's, what if I'm no longer seen the same way? What if my value was tied more to my performance than I realized? This chapter isn't about blaming systems, families, or workplaces. It's about noticing how proving can become a shared language, one that benefits some structures more than it benefits your nervous system, and how stepping out of that language requires a different kind of courage. There was a moment when I realized how much energy I was spending staying illegible, not unsafe, not misunderstood, just clear. I noticed it in how often I felt the need to explain my choices before anyone questioned them, how quickly I would smooth things over so no one felt inconvenienced by my honesty. What surprised me wasn't the behavior. It was the pressure underneath it. The quiet belief that if I wasn't careful, if I didn't manage how I showed up, I might lose standing. So I tried something small. I let a decision stand without extra framing. I allowed my no to remain simple. And I paid attention. What shifted wasn't the room. It was me. The people who needed the performance kept expecting it. The people who valued me adjusted without friction. That's when it became clear. Proven isn't always about earning connection. Sometimes it's about managing perception. And when I stopped managing the narrative, I didn't lose myself. I found a quieter kind of stability. One that didn't require me to be on all the time. When you start proving, it can feel like emptiness at first, like something essential is missing. Because proving doesn't just take energy, it gives structure, it gives direction, it gives you a script. So when that script loosens, the question becomes, what fills the space? Not immediately, not perfectly, but over time. What often emerges first isn't clarity. It's quiet. And that quiet can feel unfamiliar before it feels safe. A quieter nervous system, a quieter urgency, a quieter relationship with time. And inside that quiet, there's room to notice things you couldn't hear before. Curiosity replaces control. Presence replaces performance. Choice replaces reflex. You begin to ask different questions. Not, how do I prove I belong here? But do I actually want to be here? This is where worth starts to decouple from output, where rest no longer feels like risk, where stillness doesn't signal failure, not because you stopped caring, but because you're no longer confusing urgency with importance. What emerges when you stop proving isn't a lesser version of you. It's a more sustainable one that doesn't need to stay tense to stay valuable. And that shift from performance to presence is where reorientation really begins. This is the part of the show we call From the Community, where we slow down the reflection with questions that you've been sending in. I want to bring in a reflection from the community because this question sits right at the intersection of where we've been and where we are in this season. Someone wrote in and asked, how do I know if I'm actually growing or if I'm just performing growth? I think this connects directly back to episode 5, where we talked about taking inventory. Because growth isn't just about adding new habits or insight. Sometimes it's about noticing what hasn't changed, even though the language has. If your nervous system is still tense, if rest still feels unsafe, if your worth still rises and falls with output, you might not be growing. You might be refining the performance. Real growth usually shows up quietly. It shows up as less urgency, less explanation, more choice. It shows up when you don't feel the need to prove that you're evolving, because your body already knows. And that question, am I growing or am I performing growth, isn't meant to accuse you. It's meant to slow you down. Because the moment you stop trying to look transformed, it's often the moment transformation actually begins. Before we close, I want to offer a few blueprint tips, not as rules to follow, but as reflections you can carry with you this week. Blueprint tip number 1. Notice where proving feels automatic. Pay attention to the moments when you help before you're asked, when you explain before you're questioned, when you stay busy so you don't have to sit with discomfort. Those instincts once kept you safe, but they may no longer need to run the show. Blueprint tip number 2. Let one thing stand without reinforcement. A decision, a boundary, a moment of rest. Resist the urge to clarify, justify, or soften it for others. Notice what comes up, not in the room, but in your body. That reaction is information. Blueprint tip number 3. Separate worth from output. Gently, You don't have to dismantle this belief overnight. Just start by asking, who am I when nothing is required of me? Let that question stay open, because the goal isn't to stop contributing. It's to stop confusing contribution with value. Before we conclude today's episode, I want to bring this out of the mind and into the body. Because everything we talked about today lives in the mind, but lands in the body. This is the moment where we shift. We've talked about what proven looks like. We named how it operates. Now we slow this down and let it land. Because proving isn't just something we think, it's something we hold. If you're able, take a breath right now. Not a deep one, not a corrective one. Just notice where your body is doing work that no one asked it to do. The jaw that stays clenched, the shoulder that doesn't fully drop, the chest that feels slightly braced, as if it's preparing for something that may never come. That tension didn't appear randomly. It's learned. It adapted. It kept you moving when slowing down wasn't an option. So there's no need to judge it. Instead, try asking, what am I still holding because I once needed to? Not to force an answer, not to fix anything, just to notice. Sometimes the shift doesn't come from releasing the tension. It comes from letting yourself feel safe enough to set it down, even briefly. If proving has been how you've stayed upright in this world, then easing out of it will feel unfamiliar at first. But unfamiliar doesn't mean wrong. It often means you're no longer braced for impact. So as you move through this week, here's the question I want you to carry with you. Who would I be if I didn't need to convince anyone? Let that question meet you in your ordinary moments. When you're resting, when you're choosing, when you're deciding whether to explain or simply be. As we close, I want to remind you of something simple. You don't have to stop caring to stop proving. You don't have to disappear to rest. And you don't have to perform to be worthy of space. If this episode resonated with you, take a moment this week. Notice where you're still showing up out of habit and not intention, not to judge, not to rush it, just to notice. Because awareness is often the first act of reorientation. If you'd like to share a question or reflection for a future episode, you can reach us at blueprintandsoulpod@gmail.com. And if you're finding value in these conversations, I invite you to follow us on IG at Blueprint and Soul and share the show with someone who might need it. Next week, we'll continue this arc by widening the lens, looking at how proving, performance, and protection show up differently depending on identity, context, and history. Join us next week for episode 8. Until then, build with intention and lead with soul.